Early life of Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar was born on December 1st, 1949, in Rio Negro, a town near Medellin, Colombia. He grew up in a modest, lower middle class family. His father, Abel de Jesus Escobar, was a farmer, and his mother, Hermilda Gaviria, was a schoolteacher. Escobar's early life was marked by financial instability, and he was known for his rebellious and ambitious nature from a young age. As a teenager, Escobar became involved in petty crimes such as selling fake diplomas and stealing gravestones, which he would later sell for a profit. His criminal activities expanded as he grew older, and he soon entered the world of drug trafficking. In the early 1970s, Escobar began smuggling cocaine into the United States, initially working with smaller drug traffickers. He was quick to understand the potential of the cocaine trade, and he gradually built his own network. Escobar's ability to rise in the criminal underworld was partly due to his charismatic and cunning nature, which allowed him to gain the trust of powerful individuals and corrupt officials. His ambition, combined with his ruthless determination, set him on the path that would ultimately lead him to become one of the most notorious and influential criminals in the world. Rise in the drug trade. Pablo Escobar's rise in the drug trade began in the early 1970s, a time when cocaine was becoming increasingly popular in the United States. Escobar recognized the growing demand for the drug and quickly seized the opportunity to capitalize on this new market. Escobar started by smuggling cocaine into the U.S. from Colombia, using a variety of methods, including small airplanes and boats. He initially partnered with other drug dealers in the region, but his ambition and ruthless tactics set him apart from his competitors. As he gained experience and resources, Escobar began to control a larger portion of the cocaine trade, eventually forming the Medellin cartel. During this time, Escobar established strong connections with key figures in Colombia, including corrupt politicians, police officers, and businessmen. These alliances allowed him to move vast quantities of cocaine across borders without interference from law enforcement. He also began using violent tactics to eliminate rivals, ensuring his cartel's dominance in the market. By the late 1970s, the Medellin cartel was the largest producer and distributor of cocaine in the world, supplying as much as 70 to 80% of the cocaine consumed in the United States. Escobar's wealth grew exponentially as a result. His cartel operated with military precision, and Escobar became known not only for his criminal success, but also for his ability to avoid capture through bribery, violence, and strategic planning. Escobar's dominance in the drug trade continued into the 1980s, making him one of the richest and most dangerous men in the world. His control over the cocaine industry allowed him to build an empire that would later be estimated to be worth billions of dollars. Medellin Cartel Formation. The Medellin Cartel, founded by Pablo Escobar in the late 1970s, became one of the most powerful and violent drug trafficking organizations in history. The cartel's formation marked the beginning of Escobar's rise to dominance in the global cocaine trade. Escobar initially worked with smaller groups in Colombia to smuggle cocaine into the United States, but he quickly realized the immense potential for profit in controlling the entire supply chain. By forming the Medellin cartel, he united various drug traffickers and criminals into one formidable network. Escobar's charisma, intelligence, and ruthless tactics enabled him to consolidate power over his rivals and expand his influence across Colombia and beyond. The Medellin cartel operated with military precision, overseeing the production, processing, and distribution of cocaine. It became notorious for its ability to produce and export vast quantities of the drug, primarily to the United States, where demand for cocaine was skyrocketing in the 1980s. At its peak, the cartel controlled 70 to 80% of the world's cocaine supply. Escobar's cartel maintained control through bribery, corruption, and extreme violence. He established strong connections with politicians, law enforcement, and military officials, ensuring that his business operated without significant interference. Rival cartels and even entire towns were often intimidated or wiped out through bombings, assassinations, and terror tactics. In addition to drug trafficking, the Medellin cartel became deeply involved in money laundering, arms trafficking, and other illegal activities. Escobar used the profits to fund lavish personal projects, such as his luxurious estate, Hacienda Nápoles, and to gain political influence. The cartel's success and brutality made Escobar one of the wealthiest men in the world, but it also attracted intense attention from law enforcement agencies in both Colombia and the United States. The Medellin cartel's monopoly over the cocaine trade would eventually make Escobar a target of international law enforcement, leading to a decades-long war on drugs. Extreme wealth and influence. Pablo Escobar's wealth and influence during the height of his reign as the leader of the Medellin cartel were unparalleled, making him one of the richest and most powerful criminals in history. By the mid-1980s, Escobar's cartel controlled 70 to 80% of the global cocaine trade, generating billions of dollars in profits. At the peak of his power, his net worth was estimated at around $30 billion, making him one of the wealthiest men in the world. This enormous wealth allowed him to live a life of luxury, far beyond the means of most other billionaires. Escobar invested his wealth in numerous ventures, including private planes, helicopters, and a fleet of luxury cars. One of his most famous properties was Hacienda Nápoles, a massive estate in Colombia that included a zoo, racetrack, and private airport. He used his wealth not only for personal enjoyment, but also to bribe politicians, police officers, judges, and other public officials, ensuring his business ran smoothly and without interference. This network of corruption gave him near absolute control over the Colombian government and local law enforcement. Escobar's influence extended far beyond his criminal empire. In the early 1980s, he entered politics and was elected as an alternate congressman in Colombia. He used his political position to gain further influence, presenting himself as a benefactor of the poor. He funded housing projects, soccer fields, and other public works in his hometown of Medellin, earning him the loyalty of many locals who saw him as a modern-day Robin Hood. However, his political career was short-lived, as his criminal background and violent actions forced him out of the political spotlight. Escobar also had a profound impact on the global cocaine trade. His cartel revolutionized the production and distribution of cocaine, creating a supply chain that reached millions of consumers in the U.S. and other countries. Escobar's ability to evade capture, build alliances with powerful figures, and manipulate the system allowed him to maintain control of the global drug market for over a decade. His immense wealth and influence not only fueled his criminal activities, but also contributed to the destabilization of Colombia, as his empire brought violence, corruption, and a constant war with law enforcement. Escobar's legacy of wealth and power remains a symbol of the extreme consequences of the global drug trade. Violence and terror. Pablo Escobar's reign as the head of the Medellin cartel was marked by extreme violence and terror, both as a means of maintaining control over his criminal empire and as a response to threats from rivals and law enforcement. Escobar's use of violence and intimidation was central to his operations and became one of the most defining aspects of his legacy. Escobar's approach to violence was ruthless. To eliminate competition and maintain his grip on the cocaine trade, he ordered the assassination of thousands of individuals, including rivals, police officers, judges, journalists, and even innocent civilians. Escobar's enemies were often killed in brutal and public ways to instill fear and discourage opposition. His cartel's activities were infamous for their use of car bombs, which targeted police stations, government buildings, and even residential areas, killing both intended targets and innocent bystanders. One of the most notorious acts of violence under Escobar's command was his involvement in the bombing of Avianca Flight 203 in 1989, which resulted in the deaths of 110 people. The bombing was allegedly intended to kill a political opponent, but it claimed the lives of innocent passengers instead. This attack, along with others, demonstrated Escobar's willingness to use mass violence to achieve his goals, regardless of the cost to human life. Escobar also employed the tactic of plata o plomo, silver or lead, meaning that individuals faced the choice of accepting bribes or being killed. This created a climate of fear where corrupt officials, police officers, and even ordinary citizens were forced to choose between accepting Escobar's bribes or facing death. This practice allowed him to build a network of loyal allies across Colombia, including in the highest levels of government. The level of violence escalated further during Escobar's war with the Colombian government. Faced with the threat of extradition to the United States, Escobar declared war on the state, launching a campaign of terror that included assassinations of high-profile government officials, bombings, and attacks on law enforcement. His violent tactics led to the deaths of thousands of people and fueled a climate of fear throughout Colombia. Escobar's use of terror was not limited to his enemies. He also manipulated public sentiment by presenting himself. Although the bombing was intended to kill a political rival, it tragically took the lives of innocent civilians and further intensified the government's resolve to end Escobar's reign. Escobar's plata o plomo, silver or lead tactic. Escobar's approach to dealing with the government was based on fear and coercion. He famously employed the plata o plomo, silver or lead strategy, meaning he would offer corrupt officials the choice of accepting bribes, silver, or facing assassination, lead. This strategy allowed him to infiltrate the police and government, ensuring his cartel had a strong network of allies within Colombia's political and judicial systems. However, as the government's resolve to defeat him hardened, Escobar's tactics grew increasingly violent. The Colombian government, supported by the United States, intensified its efforts to dismantle the Medellin cartel. The government also created a special anti-drug force, the Search Bloc, tasked with capturing or killing Escobar and his associates. These forces were involved in violent confrontations with Escobar's cartel, which resulted in thousands of deaths. The Los Extraditables movement. In response to the government's extradition efforts, Escobar and his cartel launched a campaign known as Los Extraditables, the extraditables. This movement involved not only Escobar's cartel, but also other major drug lords in Colombia who opposed extradition. Through this initiative, Escobar and his allies made direct threats to the government and the Colombian people, vowing to kill anyone involved in extraditing drug traffickers to the United States. Escobar's threats were not idle. In 1989, a series of high-profile killings, including the assassination of presidential candidates and police officers, further escalated the conflict. One of the most chilling moments came when Escobar orchestrated the murder of Luis Carlos Galan, a presidential candidate who was an outspoken opponent of drug cartels and extradition. Galan's assassination sent a shockwave through the political establishment and reinforced the cartel's power. The collapse of the Medellin cartel. As the Colombian government and U.S. authorities closed in on Escobar, his power began to wane. In 1991, Escobar reached a controversial deal with the Colombian government that allowed him to surrender peacefully in exchange for the promise that he would not be extradited to the U.S. The government agreed to house him in a luxurious private prison called La Catedral, which Escobar designed and maintained himself. From inside this prison, Escobar continued to run his drug empire, but this period of relative peace was short-lived. In 1992, the Colombian government, under increasing pressure from the U.S. and its own citizens, decided to dismantle La Catedral and send Escobar to a regular prison. This decision marked the beginning of Escobar's downfall. He escaped from the prison in July 1992, and a massive manhunt ensued. By then, the Colombian government, with the help of U.S. authorities, was determined to end Escobar's reign of terror once and for all. Escobar's violent conflict with the Colombian government continued until his death in December 1993, when he was killed in a firefight with Colombian police in Medellin. Impact on Colombia. Escobar's war with the government left a deep scar on Colombia. The violence, corruption, and fear generated by the conflict destabilized the country, contributing to a wave of lawlessness and suffering. Thousands of lives were lost, and the country's institutions were severely weakened. Escobar's reign of terror also fueled the rise of other criminal organizations, such as the Cali cartel, and left a lasting legacy of violence and corruption in Colombia. La Catedral, his personal prison, La Catedral, the cathedral, was no ordinary prison. It was a luxurious private estate built by Pablo Escobar in 1991 after he negotiated a deal with the Colombian government. The agreement allowed Escobar to surrender to authorities, but instead of facing a regular prison, he would be allowed to serve his sentence in a prison of his own design, where he would live in comfort and continue to run his criminal empire. The deal and its terms. In 1991, the Colombian government, under intense pressure from both the United States and its own citizens to capture Escobar, agreed to a deal that would allow him to surrender voluntarily. In exchange for his surrender, Escobar was promised that he would not be extradited to the United States. He also negotiated the conditions under which he would serve his sentence. Escobar insisted that he would only accept imprisonment if he could build and maintain his own private prison. Escobar's version of prison was far from what most would imagine. La Catedral was a luxurious compound situated atop a hill in the Colombian mountains, and it had everything Escobar needed to live comfortably, including a soccer field, a nightclub, a jacuzzi,